So you've successfully transitioned many different careers. A lot of our graduates today are coming back as adult learners, and they're going to be looking to transition into new career paths as well. So what advice would you give them for successfully transitioning in between different career paths?
That's a good question, and I'm surprised that you're asking because it clearly knows you've done your research and tells me that you've kind of seen several of the transitions that I've gone through. When I went to college, I actually went to college to become a high school teacher. So this is all the way back in the late '90s, and I went through a teacher training program, and I was a middle school and high school history and civics teacher, and I was not a good teacher, and I taught for about a year. Just realized like this is not for me. Like this is not the pace. This is not played to my strengths, and so I learned, basically that I got a college degree preparing me for a field that I quickly learned was not going to work, and I left that and for several years taught in youth detention centers and prisons all over Georgia. And I, through that, learned that I had a real heart for people who were caught up in the justice system. And sometimes it takes trying several things out to figure out, is this a job or is this my calling? And across the years, I've had a dozen jobs, and I was probably fired from like 10 of them. Like plenty of places I just tried and it wasn't a good fit. And it took me kind of experimenting the best that I could. But one of the things that helped me was I had some skills that I could transfer to whatever field I was in. Like, so even though I wasn't a great middle school or high school civics teacher, I learned that I loved teaching, just not in that environment. I was more into adult education, but that skill transferred. I learned through all of that how much I loved writing. And so even though some of my jobs required me to write more than others, it was a skill that I could take with me through any of those professions. And so I didn't become a professional journalist until I was in my mid-30s. And people are shocked because I didn't go to journalism school. I wasn't even on the path to becoming a journalist. And I didn't get hired to work for the New York Daily News until I was 35 years old. And yet, all of the experience I had for the 15 years of my adult life prior to that allowed me to become a better writer. And so my advice to CUNY students and graduates and others who may watch this is understand that sometimes you have to have a job that you don't like, and that's just being an adult. And for most of my life, I had jobs that I liked a little, but I didn't love them, but I just had to do them. It was just, I had a family, I had responsibilities, but you want to get closer and closer if you can to finding out, is there a way to make a living doing the thing I love? And it took me, I'm 38, it took me, pretty much 35, 36 years of my life of trying so many different things until I finally said, this is something I love so much that I would do it for free. Let me see if there's a way to pay the bills doing it. But you also can't be afraid to reinvent yourself. Like just because you're on a path doesn't mean you can't change it or get off of it. Like my mother is the sweetest soul ever. She worked at a light bulb factory for almost 45 years, her entire adult life, literally from the time she was 18 until she retired. And I remember when I was a little child, when I was a teenager, even when I was an adult, she always talked about wanting to do something else, but she just never made that shift. And part of what she wanted for me that she never really had for herself, she wanted me to be able to find the thing that I love doing. And so part of what I hope to even teach my own kids and teach other people is, if you're in a job that pays the bills, that's good. Keep your job. And try to see if you can, while you're working that full-time job, if you can work an internship, see if you can get your foot in the door doing the thing that you think you might love. Because you may find, like I did as a teacher, like, this is not even for me. And so some of it is not, like, I never put myself in a bind to pursue my dream. That's in the movies. But I have 5 kids, I'm married, I have my own responsibilities. So even though I've been able to move from career to career, I always made sure that I had my foot in the door or had a promise of a job before I left the one that I had. In New York in particular, I have found so much of what you can do is who you know. And so part of your responsibility is, if you're doing a job that's just a 9 to 5, just to pay the bills, make sure that you're trying to meet the people in the profession or the career that you want. Be at events, conferences, again, apply for internships, and never allow your age or any of that stuff to get in the way. In fact, like even at my age now, if I was hiring interns, sometimes there may be positions where we prefer a young college student, but there are many times where what we're really looking for is a mature adult to be in that space. So don't ever think that you've aged yourself out of those new opportunities. I hope that gives some insight.
Yeah, definitely. When we hear social media used in the other media, it's almost always framed in a negative light. But I feel like you've also established that it can be used for positive and used to enact change. And do you think that you would have reached your current level of success without your big social media following?
No, I definitely don't think people would know so much about me if not for these platforms, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and others. And I've been on each of those platforms long enough to where I actually remember a time where Twitter was friendly and beautiful. I'm talking like 2008.
Yeah.
I remember a time where Facebook was genuinely just college students and friends. Like there was this weird moment where these platforms had almost no spam, almost no hate. Like my first year and a half on Twitter, the notion that people would be overtly hateful was even just far-fetched. So there was this kind of like incubator period on all of these platforms where they were just people being their best selves. But here we are 10 years after most of these platforms launched, and there's a lot of ugliness. Like there's so much hate from people, be it based on race or religion or sexuality or sexual orientation. Like it can be a genuinely hateful, problematic place. We talk now so much about fake news, and there is a lot of fake bad information on social media. And because of that, it can get a really bad rap. But at the end of the day, these literally are agnostic platforms where you can make it, if you have something you're trying to do, you can make it good. I think for me, it's done 3 good things. The first thing is it's allowed me to connect with people who have the same passions about the world as I do. Like I heard you a moment ago say that you're going to some 9 Inch Nails concerts, right? Well, when I was growing up, when I was growing up in the 80s in a small town in Kentucky, if you had a particular passion, if somebody in your school or in your neighborhood didn't have it, you didn't know who else had it. Well, social media allows you to find people quickly who share the same affinities, concerns, problems. So, like, I fight a lot against police brutality. Well, because of social media, I'm able to build relationships with people all over the world who have that same concern of saying, hey, we need to, including police officers that I connect with all over the country. Secondly, it allows you to share stories that may not make it into the mainstream media, that might not be on the nightly news, that might not be in mega newspapers. And particularly, I fight for a lot of people who are oppressed, whose stories rarely get that type of coverage. And I don't think without social media, I don't think we would have ever heard of Ferguson, Missouri. I had never heard of it before social media. I don't think we would know most of the cases of police brutality. And then lastly, it's a way for you to figure out how you can make a difference with a cause that you may really care about. Good information is hard to come by. But if you can find the people who share the same passions that you do, it allows you to see, well, what are they doing? What can I do? What events are out there? Is there a way for me to make a difference on this issue from home? And I've tried to use all of these platforms to give people just basic opportunities to do good. But I am grieved at how much bad happens on them as well. So it's tricky for sure.
Do you think it's a case with the police brutality? Is it a case of it happening more, or we just have more access to the information?
That's a great question. And most people tell me all the time, and I even see some really smart people say, listen, some of these problems aren't worse. Social media just allows us to share them more. And I get why they think that. So there's some truth to that. Social media does allow us to share stories of injustice more because we don't have to wait for the news. We don't have to wait for a newspaper to print it. We can share it. But police brutality in particular is actually getting worse. 2018 is on pace to be the deadliest year ever measured for police brutality. So we're in this horrible moment where it is actually getting worse, and you can measure that. There are websites, Pulitzer Prize winning websites that track it, and this year is on pace to be the deadliest year ever. But we're also hearing the stories more because we have more news platforms and more social media platforms to tell those stories. So, and the same is true of hate speech. People say, well, is it getting worse, or is it just that we now have social media? Well, hate speech offline, not just talking about what happens on Twitter or Facebook, is going up significantly. Hate crimes are going up significantly. And it's not just because they're being measured more, they're actually happening more. Yeah. And social media can make us think it's just being covered more, but there's some things in our country that are definitely getting worse. I'm deeply grieved by that.
If you were a student graduating today, what would be your first steps towards reaching a career in social justice?
Tough question. It is hard to have a career in social justice. So many of us who are now known as organizers and activists, when we first started doing this work, and most of us even to this very day, we had other jobs. Mm-hmm. I was working in 2014 when Eric Garner was killed here in New York, and then in a span of about 3 weeks, he was killed. Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, and this young man named John Crawford was killed in Ohio. I was the communications director for an environmental charity in California, and I wasn't doing social justice. I wasn't doing like environmental racism. We were talking about green energy and like hardcore environmentalism, and it was a good job, and I enjoyed it. But anything that I did around organizing people in 2014 was while I was working a completely unrelated job. And so even now, like I have 4 real jobs right now. So I work full time for The Intercept, which is an investigative news platform. I am working at Harvard Law School with a project there. I work for a morning show called the Tom Joyner Morning Show. And I also have something called the Real Justice PAC. And all of those things aren't really activism. Like I work those 4 jobs mainly because New York is so damn expensive that I kind of have to have all of those jobs just to have a place for my family to live here. But even today, 4 years after I started really focusing so much of my life on police brutality and social justice, I still have to work all these other jobs to give myself time and space and the resources to do social justice work. So most of the people that I know that are doing social justice work still have other full-time jobs that sometimes are completely unrelated. They're lawyers, they're nurses, they are program managers for charities and nonprofits that may be doing completely unrelated stuff. They may be business people or entrepreneurs. So I said that to say that even as well known as I am for doing social justice work, I've had to have other jobs to support me and then just find the space and time to do the social justice work. So I said that to say that you need money to live and to support yourself. So when you get out of college, it's very important that you get a job, that you get a job that supports you, that allows you to be independent, that allows you to maybe have a little extra money to travel to do the social justice work you want, or to give to build the thing that you may want, be it a website or to start a charity yourself. And that job at first may be just like me, it may be completely unrelated. But because I was spending pretty much all of my free time fighting for justice, I eventually found other ways to write about it and make a living, to speak about injustice and make a living. And yet it took me several years to get to that point. So, there are, though, thankfully, more and more charities and nonprofits doing social justice work. Now, if you're a new graduate, again, you could apply for all of these for so many different organizations and charities, but it's more important just that you get a well-paying job, and let me say why. Even charities and other jobs seem to prefer to hire people that already have jobs. Like people like to hire you away from somewhere else. And so when you're applying for something, when people see that you're already in the workforce, that you're already doing work, and that you're reliable and dependable in whatever it is you're doing, supervisors are much more apt to hire you away from a job than they are to hire you when you're unemployed. So I say that to say it's important to just work. Now, if you're still in college, there's nothing better than volunteering and getting internship experience, because so many social justice organizations hire their interns. And that can make it really hard to break through if you don't take that route. So I know many social justice groups only hire their interns, or they hire someone from another social justice group. So, again, it may be that if you graduate, that you work a full-time job. It could be anything. It could be retail. It could be at a restaurant. But that in your free time, you're volunteering and interning with something, be it locally here in New York, or if you move somewhere around the country. But it's important for you to get your foot in the door. And an internship or volunteer work is really one of the best ways to do that. You do have to adjust to the reality that social justice work is not lucrative. It's not financially lucrative. Emotionally, it is the most fulfilling work that you can do. Like, I have the peace of mind of knowing when I go to bed at night that I gave my life the very best that I had, that I fought for people, that I tried to help people, and that's very rewarding and fulfilling. I love that it sets an example for my children. Now, there are other things that I could be doing that may be way more lucrative financially. So just know that social justice work, there is a way to do it and pay the bills, but it will never be, you will never be wealthy doing it. And that goes with many service professions, and social justice work is one of them.
What advice do you have for students who are still in school, but they want to make an impact and get involved?
When I was an undergraduate student, I was a student leader. I was student government president at my college. I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta. And first and foremost, I think it's important to take student leadership positions within the college, within the university. Like I don't mean to say that is it's fake, but it is an opportunity for you to get real experience leading a meeting, organizing volunteers, without the burden of it being so serious that if you mess up, that you could be harming people's lives. So like the experience I got as a student leader at Morehouse, leading meetings, building volunteers, setting an agenda, managing a budget, like I messed up way more than I got right. But those lessons that I learned helped me significantly when I actually got out and was reading and was leading real life organizations where people really relied on me. So when I did graduate, I graduated with a lot of really practical experience. So sometimes the student leadership opportunities that you get as a college student, they may not be glamorous, but it's where you cut your teeth and get really essential skills. It's where I learned how to speak on the mic, how to keep people's attention, how to do an effective presentation, and to do it without, horrible consequences if I slipped up or wasn't great. It just allowed me to grow in a space that was pretty safe. Now, the other thing is, if you are a college student now, it is still a tremendous time, and you and I spoke about this before. It's still a tremendous time to figure out, is there a way for me to intern with local organizations? If you are able to study abroad, now many students who are watching may not have the mobility of being able to study abroad, but there'll never be a time like when you're a college student, particularly if you're a full-time college student, to be able to either travel the country or study in another country. That I try to recommend that for college students every chance I get. And I really want to encourage students, if they have the freedom to leave New York for summer internships, summer jobs, if they're able to, consider studying somewhere outside of the city. Go to the West Coast. See if there is something internationally in Brazil, in South Africa, in London. And students may not understand this, but all over the country, people really like to hire people from New York. And like we just live here, and so we don't think about it like that. But having real New York experience is valuable and could open up doors for you around the country as well.
In an era where so many people are fighting injustice, sometimes on multiple fronts, how do we work together to unite our voices to make the message stronger instead of drowning each other out?
The horrible thing about the time that we live in is that there's so much wrong going on. There's so much injustice. Like, I focus a lot of my time and energy on police brutality, but someone could focus on something altogether different and never mention police brutality and fight for something else their entire lives. It could be literacy. Like, my wife is an elementary school teacher, and she believes strongly, and my wife she is bothered by police brutality, but that's not her primary issue. It could be physical health or mental health. There's so many things to fight for and so many things to fight against, that one of the biggest problems that people have is we end up being overwhelmed by how much is wrong in the world, and there's a lot wrong. And so I try to give people two bits of advice, maybe three things. First is I try to advise people, even though there are 100 different things that are wrong in the world, to pick one particular thing that breaks your heart. Like, what's the thing? And because what that is for you may be very different than what that is for me. And so pick the thing that just crushes your soul. If it's problems with immigrants in this country being discriminated against, or, today in my commencement speech, I mentioned how immigrant families are being separated, parents from their children. Well, if that's the problem that breaks your heart, you have to identify that and say, listen, that's the thing I'm going to make a difference with. Now, the painful part is when you make that decision. So for me, it's police brutality. When you make that decision, that means that you can no longer effectively focus on a lot of other issues. So the first thing you ask yourself is, what breaks my heart? And make a decision to do something about it. And for me, that's police brutality, but for someone else, it could be like one of my mentors is an animal rights advocate. Now, I would never be an animal rights advocate, but that is his thing. And so you have to find what that thing is for you and go for it. The second thing is try to ask yourself, what is it in the world that I love doing so much that I would do it for free? Well, for me, that is being a writer. And I love to write, and I love using words to tell stories. And if you can find the thing that you love so much that you would do it for free, if you can eventually find a way to use the thing that you love to impact the thing that you hate, you then are kind of in your sweet spot. And then the last thing that I would say is I openly accept that I can't be an effective advocate for every problem. So I have one lane that I stay in, but what I do to help all the other problems, and this is something that we should do more of, doesn't mean that I don't care about other things, but what I do is I amplify other people whose specialty may be something altogether different. So for me, it's police brutality. So people whose problem that they want to change is not police brutality, they amplify me. Well, my friend Glenn, who his concern is animal rights, I know nothing about that. So I amplified Glenn's work. So part of what I'm trying to say is find your specialty. Doesn't mean that you can't dibble dabble in some other stuff. But if you're fighting 20 battles, you probably won't be effective in any of them. So what I do is I find one thing and I really try to make a difference with it. And then for everything else, I amplify other people's work and say, listen, if this is your thing, support this. And ultimately, that then I build rapport with other people who may have completely different concerns than I do, and it still allows me to stay in my space and in my lane. But ultimately, this feeling that we get sometimes of being overwhelmed by how much is wrong in the world, that's a very real feeling, and I feel it sometimes. And so in some ways, fighting to make the world better is even like a form of therapy for me, just to get through how much is wrong with the world.
So I grew up in Nebraska, so I grew up with football not just being watching a football game, but when your family and friends got together, it meant family time to me. As I got older, I became a fan of the NFL too, and I've made excuses for the concussions, I've made excuses for the drugs, I've made excuses for, the domestic violence, but I feel like now we're at a point where they're stifling the players' freedom of speech, and I feel like maybe now I'm finally reaching a point where I will boycott as well.
Yeah.
Do you think that there will be players who sit out the season or continue to kneel and accept the penalty that the NFL is imposing?
Those are good questions. And I'm a lot like you in the sense that I really grew up just a huge sports fan. And I grew up loving football. Like I'm 38, and I think last year was the first Super Bowl that I chose not to watch. And I literally, before that, think I probably watched the previous 30 Super Bowls. Like it was not, but I watched games every week. I was a huge NFL fan. And I never imagined, like I even, part of even why I'm now fighting for many of these guys in the NFL is because I first knew them as fans. Like I was a fan of Colin Kaepernick. Before I ever knew Colin personally, I was a huge fan of him and of the 49ers, and I rooted for him when he was at the Super Bowl, and never imagined that he would now be in a position where for almost 500 days he's been basically banned from the NFL. Here he is, a capable, competent quarterback. Most people rank him somewhere between the 15th and 20th best quarterback in the league, and there are 90 quarterbacks that have jobs, and he doesn't. And so even though he could be a starter on half of the teams, because he chose to take, which at the time did not violate any rules, because he chose to take a knee to protest injustice in America, he basically has lost his career over it. And not just Colin, but his teammate, one of his best friends, Eric Reed, who also played on the team with him. Eric is 26 years old, was a Pro Bowl defensive back, and has basically also been banned from the NFL. No team has signed Eric. He's generally thought to be the 5th or 6th best player in the league at his position. And he hasn't even been offered a league minimum contract. Like, he literally thought this was the year he would be signing the league maximum contract. And so what we see is a few of these brave men who took a really courageous stance against injustice. And we have to go back in time a little bit. When Colin Kaepernick first took a knee, first it was a military veteran who actually advised him to do it that way, saying, hey, taking a knee during the anthem is much more a sign of reverence and respect than just sitting down or even not being there at all. So you should take a knee. And you have to think, this is in July and August of 2016. This was when Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, 2 young black men, were shot and killed by police in a span of just a few days. And it was in the wake of those 2 murders that he just felt like, what does this country stand for? And what do I stand for? And so it was in that environment that he decided to take a knee, which is understandable. And like, he was a grieving person wondering what really matters right now. And, you know, I was proud of him for taking the knee, and I thought it was the right thing to do. And his only goal was to shed light on the problem of police brutality and injustice. But that these men now, the NFL has recently developed a rule prohibiting any form of demonstration during the national anthem. And less than I'm bothered about the new rule, I'm bothered at how they did it. No players were even allowed to participate in those conversations with the rules being formed, including the players' union. And I think even deeper than that, I'm most bothered that good men have had their careers taken away in the prime of their lives for doing something silent and peaceful. And I think it's a real sign of the times that we're living in. And so for me, and I've been careful not to say, you know what, you should boycott. For me, as a lifelong NFL fan and football junkie, just like yourself, I can't in good conscience support a league that is basically banning good men, skilled athletes, for doing something that Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed did. And so I can't watch that game and still feel good about it, knowing that these other men have had their lives turned upside down as a result. And even still, I'm still torn because I have many friends who are in the league, and I would love to watch them, and I would love to support them and say, hey, I saw what you did, congratulations, or hey, I saw it look like you might have gotten injured, are you okay? And so I hate that I am boycotting the league, but I feel like the league has made this decision for me. And I know many other really dedicated fans who feel the same way. It's just like, it hurts as a lifelong fan, but I'll just have to use that time to do something else. Like my family and I, we watched movies, we went to the park. Normally Sunday was the day where we stayed and watched games, or even for other football fans, I was watching them on Thursday night and Monday night. And so I've just tried to use that time to do something else. I don't know what the players are going to do. I've talked to dozens of them over the past few weeks. They're bothered. And some of them are talking about sitting out. Some of them are even talking about not playing at all. Others are talking about staying in the locker room during the anthem. Some are considering taking a knee anyway and just having the team pay the fine. But all of them have basically been silenced, because here's what I hear most from players, and it hurts me to say this. Most of them have told me, Shaun, I'm afraid if I do any of those things that I'll end up like Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed and I'll lose my career. So I'm talking about brave, strong, grown men saying the potential consequence concerns me so much that even though I want to do A, B, or C, I don't know if I can. And I understand them. This is their livelihood. Many of these men, this is how they intended to make a living. And it's just sad that that's where we are right now, that these good guys feel like taking a peaceful stance might cost them their career. And I think it's a painful sign of where we are in 2018. And I'm very frustrated about it. And I think all of us, it's not just about the NFL. I think we need to think much more about where do we spend our money? What do these companies actually stand for? Who am I supporting? Like, people were frustrated today because Kanye West came out with an album today. And I just said, look, I just don't want to hear it. Like, I've been a huge fan of Kanye's music my whole life, but he has said some things and done some things over the past month or two that I just don't really want to support somebody who sees the world the way he sees it. And other people say, well, I don't care what someone does in their personal lives. Well, for me, I do. And I don't want to support men who abuse women. I don't want to support men who may be abusive in other ways. And so I think all of us are saying, I need to be much more careful about the decisions I make and what I support and who I support. And it might be clumsy, but it's worth doing.